Great. Okay, so the structure of this webinar is pretty straightforward. We are going to talk about adaptive programming in three main categories: organizational culture, leadership, and clear systems. In each category, I'm going to briefly define the topic. Khaled is going to give some insights from his recent paper with Prisma around adaptive programming in practice. And then I'm going to hand over to you guys to write your own suggestions on the whiteboard, which is why you needed to practice it earlier. And then we'll kind of discuss the suggestions and take any other comments. If you have questions or comments at any time, just write them in the chat box. And yeah, thank you very much for joining. So let's quickly start by saying, what do I mean by adaptive programming? And I think it is quite a simple concept. It means just being able to change what you're doing as you're going along in response to what you're learning and in response to changes in the context. And it sounds easy, but not many programs manage it. Partly due to rigid systems, you have your work plan, your activities at the beginning, difficult to change it. It kind of makes the accountability relationship with the donor harder. Partly fear of failure, no one wants to admit mistakes. And partly MRM systems don't provide the information you need to know what's working and what isn't. And we're going to talk about three things in this webinar. These are all things we've learned from experience of programs using the DCED standard, critical for adaptive programming. And the first one is an organizational culture that supports it. Second is clear systems for how to do it. And the third is strong leadership, which drives the other two forward and is important in its own right. Okay, so I'm going to start by saying quickly what is a good culture. And the first point I wanted to highlight was that a good culture, sorry, let me take a step back. I think culture is one of the most important factors affecting the use of results, but it's also the least measurable, least visible. If you go into an organization, it's very easy to see and assess systems. It's easy to see the quality of the senior, well, it's easy to look at the leader. It's much harder to tell the organizational culture. So I think of it a bit like an iceberg. You can see the tip of it, but there's a lot more underneath the surface that's invisible. And I wanted to quickly highlight a couple of features of a good culture. Firstly, people in the organization have the focus on the organizational mission rather than just implementing activities. So they're not thinking just about how to get their activities done, how to get a training session organized, but they're also thinking about how do they achieve their overall organizational gains. And this might be increasing jobs, it might be pro-poor agricultural opportunities, whatever it is, it's something which informs their day-to-day work. I think a second, much more widely discussed, is that mistakes and failure are considered learning opportunities, not just something to hide. So we all make mistakes at the individual and maybe especially at the organizational level. When this happens, people need to learn from it and improve. So failure isn't shameful, it's not blamed within the organization, it's openly communicated. I think this leads us to our next point, which is that key groups in the organization and externally are able to communicate and collaborate and work together. And I think not having stigma attached to failure is an important part of this, because it means that if you don't take shame in your mistakes, you're more likely to communicate them to others, and you are less defensive about what you've done that hasn't worked. But communication is obviously two ways. You need to provide information, but you also need to listen to what other people are saying, and a good organizational culture needs to promote that. Okay, so another point is that time is set aside for discussions and learning. I think we all feel quite overstressed, over busy in the day, so thank you all for taking time out of it to come and listen to this webinar. But a good organizational culture will encourage you to do this, encourage you to not spend your whole time running around after urgent priorities, but set aside time for discussion and learning. I also wanted to highlight, and again, it links to a lot of other points. In a good organizational culture, I think staff are encouraged to be curious, both about their interventions, to understand what change is happening and why it is happening, but also about the wider markets that they work in, to look at changes in, let's say, the dairy sector, or whatever the sector is, and even if it's not directly relevant to their intervention to try and understand why change is happening. And finally, from my point of view, is that a good organizational culture needs to include an element of accountability. That is to say, staff need to be held to account for what they do and don't do, but this needs to be in relation to things that matter. We all work in quite challenging contexts where failure to achieve a work plan or a deliverable is not necessarily the fault of the individual, so holding someone rigidly to account for it can have negative consequences. But holding people to account for following good processes, for thinking about the results that they're achieving, for being curious about the work, I think there's an important balance that is really critical to a good organizational culture. Maybe we'll talk a bit more about this balance, and I'll be interested to hear your ideas when we get to your suggestions in a few minutes. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Khaled.
Hello, everyone. This is Khaled Khan from Prisma. I hope everybody can hear me. Like what Adam mentioned about the culture, before going into that, let me give you a little bit brief of history why we came up with this learning series paper. So Prisma is a MSD program. Worked in agriculture for 5 years. We are in our second phase, in our 6th year. So we started in 2014 and finished our first phase in 2018. During our first phase, in the middle of 2015, we realized a problem that many of the program face. There's a tension between the results measurement or MRM team and the implementation or the sector team. And the tension was at some point not helping our program to move forward, and we decided to do a fact-finding mission to see, okay, what are the underlying causes for this tension, and try to find solution that helps our program to move forward in terms of implementing the work and implementing our results measurement strategy. So based on that, we implemented few recommendations which touches more on our culture, and I'll talk about some of the recommendations that actually worked well for our program, and some of the learning that towards the end of the program we thought worth sharing. The first point is about explaining what is data. So when we are talking about adaptive management, and data is the center of adaptive management, what we are trying to say is if we need to be flexible and do experiment and always adaptable to the change and improve our program, we need to make quick decision, lot of decision, and the decision needs to be based on data and evidence. That's why we put data at the center. And the first point is, what is the data we are talking about? So the first learning we said is explain to the sector team what Prisma means by data and what they gain from gathering it. Initially, the idea of data is a baseline and impact assessment. All the results we get from the field, that is data. But we had to demystify the definition. It is not only baseline and results measurement. It is starting from the data we collected from our sector analysis at the beginning, during our monitoring, when we are talking to our partners, when we are talking to our farmers during a field visit, all actually data that helps us make our decision in the future. So demystifying what is the data helped a lot from the beginning. And after we realized that's one of the problem that people are not aware of what data we are talking about, we include that in our induction program for the beginning for the new staff. We made sure all the managers took lead in explaining. It's not only the RM people who's telling the sector team or the implementation team what is the data we are looking for, but the managers actually taking the lead in explaining. And always about the why data is important for our decision making. We explain those points in detail. Then the second learning that we got is clear roles and responsibility. That is important not only for data gathering but for all aspects of results measurement and the implementation work. So we had to give a very clear roles and responsibility for the sector team and for the results measurement team. It needs to be as explicit as possible. In our results measurement guideline, we have a table that talks about all the roles, and we added who's taking the lead and who's supporting. So if let's say it's an impact assessment study, farmer survey, questionnaire development, sector team will support and RM team will take the lead. Regular monitoring, RM team will support and sector team will take the lead. So we made that as explicit, as detailed as possible. And the managers had to reinforce that they're actually following that roles and responsibility. When we say it is a responsibility, and there's always a function of accountability comes with the responsibility, and the managers need to be involved. They need to reinforce that responsibility to the team. It is sometimes very it's not very clear for many of the team members. We still see that who should be responsible for what, and when we make both of them responsible, usually it doesn't work. It's always better to make either results measurement team or the implementation team as the main primary responsible, and the other team as the secondary responsible. If we have any role where both are primary responsible, usually it doesn't work. So when you are thinking about roles and responsibility, make sure one has the major responsibility or the primary responsibility. The third learning we had was when we are collecting the data, we made M&E plan. In all our program, M&E plan is something we always develop. We have a results chain indicator. We put what tools we are going to use, which date we are going to collect the data. But our experience shows that that plan usually doesn't always work as we planned. Most of the time we have to adapt a lot, and the system we wanted to create is flexible enough to actually cater those changes. And what we learned that if we let the sector team to decide or the implementation team to decide when to collect the data, that helps a lot, rather than the results measurement team goes and actually tells the sector team this is the time to capture the data on these indicators. Because the sector team knows best when we would actually see some results, and if they're in control and they're the one who's deciding, then the ownership is also higher. So one thing we did in our program is the budget of baseline and impact assessments. Rather than we putting it in the RM budget, in phase one we had that in our sector team budget. So when we'll design an impact assessment study or a baseline study, the sector team actually had to initiate the activity to get the approval, to make sure the budget is there. So they had no other option but to be involved from the beginning. And that actually worked a lot to make sure that both teams are involved from the beginning of the process. And they would decide when they start, and the RM team will support in that process. And in terms of regular monitoring, we try to combine the regular monitoring with the regular field tip when sector team, the implementation team goes to the field for a activity. From the RM side, we gave them the indicators or the points they have to collect the data, but we did not force them to follow a plan that, okay, this is the week you should go and collect the data. We gave them enough flexibility that these are the indicators you need to collect. When you are going to the field, make sure you add one more day or a few hours to collect this information. And that actually helped in terms of reducing our cost in traveling and optimizing the time in the field and in the office for the sector team. The fourth point about culture is when we are designing the impact assessment study, especially, we don't follow the very basic process that, okay, we have our results chain, we have our indicators, we convert the indicators to the questions that we want to ask. Yeah, that part is there. But when we are developing the questionnaire, we make sure the sector team has enough opportunity to add questions in the questionnaire. What we decided in terms of roles and responsibilities, the results measurement team will make sure the proving the intervention is working or not. So that part, the questions that needs to be added to prove the intervention is working or not, they will add that. But the improving part, what are the things we need to know to improve our intervention in the future, the sector team will take lead on adding those questions in the impact assessment. Yeah, sometimes it can be too much, and we have to manage. If the survey becomes too long, it will be not operationalized. So we had to pick. But usually it gives us some interesting aspects of the intervention that we would not capture through our regular indicator. So we encourage and also made it a roles and responsibility that adding questions in the impact assessment is a sector team's job. The fifth one is after we get all the data from the field, how we are processing that. So what we found is sharing lessons from the field, reports, and impact assessment should be part of someone's job. What we found in our program is people are writing a field report after they go to the field. If it is an activity or monitoring field visit, they will come back and write a report. And then it goes into our file server, and nobody is actually like gathering all the data and making use of a sense of the data into a information to a knowledge. And that's because everybody was writing the report, but no single person was responsible for collecting all those data, synthesizing those data, and making into an information and knowledge. So we tried that. It did not work fully, but we tried to make sure one person from each team has the responsibility. Usually is whoever is the sector coordinator or who's the senior person, to make sure that person actually gathering all the data and making it accessible in a form of learning and lessons to the others. If nobody is actually responsible, usually all those data is kept as raw form, and nobody is actually using that optimally.
Great. Okay. So thanks, Khaled. I am going to switch back to the whiteboard. If I can clear all text, or Amy will do it. Brilliant. Thanks. Okay. So now over to you. I'm going to post the comments which Khaled, the suggestions which he gave. Thanks, Mike. So could you please take a minute to think about organizational culture in your organization or in organizations you've worked in or consulted for. Think about, for you, what really works for improving organizational culture. What suggestions would you give? How would you recommend people do it? And then I want you to use the interactive whiteboard to add text on the screen which gives your suggestions. You can do this if you by going to the bottom bar. You click on the little pointer icon, and then you can select to draw, to put text. So just select the text option and add some text like this. So we've got someone, regular meetings with a good atmosphere. Awesome, that's a really good recommendation. Yeah, okay, I'm going to go quiet for a few minutes. So please just think about your recommendations. Write them in. If you can't think of any recommendations, then just tick other recommendations which you think are really good. So like that. And if you can't work out the interactive whiteboard, just let me know in the chat box. Oh, sorry, a final piece of advice. You can also select and shrink your text. Okay.
Yep, like Adam mentioned, please also give a tick mark of those 5 points that I mentioned. Which one you think is more applicable or more useful for your program?
Thank you for whoever's gone for red text as well. That's it adds some much needed variety. Whoever wrote about failure forums, could you please write in the chat box a bit more about failure forums and how it works in your organization? Debrief. Good, thanks Elvis for... Okay, good. Removing the results framework. Whoever put removing the results framework as an implementation tool, it would be great if you could add more points. And now I think everyone has written some text. Can you go to your drawing icon and just tick what you think is the most interesting recommendation? Good. Someone is struggling with the triangle tool. Okay, Khaled, we'll give people another minute and then we'll kind of talk through some of them. Is that okay? Yeah. Whoever wrote regular meetings with a good atmosphere, I would also be interested if you can type in the chat box, how do you try and promote a good atmosphere? How do you make sure that there's a good atmosphere in your regular meetings? Because it's hard to do. Good. Okay. Right, Khaled, should we go from the bottom? And maybe we'll quickly say what's your experience or reflection on failure forums, problem-solving workshops?
No, that's a very good point. The failure culture we always talk about in our especially on the MST programs, that failure culture and acceptance of failure is a big component of our work. And if you don't have that culture, it's very difficult to be adaptive. What the way I see it is how we anticipate the failure, and if we have enough early warning system in our whole process, then it works as a program. If you only fail and don't do anything about that, definitely it doesn't work. So we need to set up a system that gives us an early warning and anticipate where the failure might come. What we try to do is in our regular review meetings, when we have our in our program, we have a 6-monthly review meeting where we talk a lot about what's going on right and what's not going on as planned, and that's we never actually like punished anyone for failing in their intervention. If the early warning sign was there and people did not pick it up, yeah, that's definitely a problem. But if it is early signs were picked up and it was discussed, and the decision is made either to go or stop it, we always accepted that, even actually rewarded people for finding those early failures.
Good. Okay, thanks a lot. I think it's a really interesting point, Melanie, and I think what you say kind of goes beyond kind of like passive acceptance of failure towards actively encouraging people to share failures. We did something similar in a recent workshop with Comic Relief, where we kind of had 2 half-day sessions. One half was where people presented a case study of success, which they wanted to talk about, and then we talked about the factors underlying it. And then another example was where people presented case studies of failure within their project. And then we went on to kind of talk about what are the factors underlying this, how does it compare? So I think that's a really interesting point. Okay, engaging stakeholders is important, but I think let's pick just a few of these to go through. Regular meetings with a good atmosphere. Khaled, how do you ensure a good atmosphere in your kind of regular meetings?
Yeah, that's a big topic that goes beyond even adaptive management practice. I think the value that works most is if we are open to suggestions and we are curious about knowing things, rather than having a mindset that we already know the answer to many of the questions. So that kind of mindset is very important before we enter to our meeting, that somebody will come up with a new information, and even if that doesn't actually match with my knowledge, that doesn't mean it's a wrong information. So having that curious mindset before entering the meeting gives a very, very good atmosphere, and be as honest as possible when we are talking, and when we are arguing with each other, dividing the content from the people is very important. When somebody is saying something about a technical topic, if it is not in line with my learning, it doesn't reflect to the person, it reflects to the content. So separating the people's emotion, how they are reacting to the content of the discussion, I think helps a lot to not to be overwhelmed and make a difficult atmosphere in the meeting.
Great. Okay, really good tips. I think I'll add that getting everyone to do some work before a meeting kind of really helps the atmosphere, because people know what will be discussed, what the agenda is, what the inputs are, and you don't get kind of unpleasant surprises. I think a specific source of a bad atmosphere is when the intervention team feel attacked by the monitoring team for what they're doing. The monitoring team is saying, oh, you haven't achieved this, or you haven't got like this result. And for this, I think joint monitoring activities are really important. So the intervention team feel part of the monitoring and understand what will be like, they know what the results are because they were part of collecting it. And then I think there are a lot more general points about, how is it facilitated? How is failure treated? What are people like? Is the atmosphere of telling people off for not doing their work, or is it for joint problem-solving workshops? And if you have any more ideas for any of these questions, please put it in the chat box. I see Melanie and, Graham. I'm not quite sure your pronunciation. But yes, let's go to Gronya, thank you. Let's go to that point about results frameworks. And your point is that from Christian Ireland said that removing the results framework has been beneficial because having this conversation without reference to a results framework means that effectively you have a broader conversation. You're not just looking at specific targets, and you're not just looking at progress against targets. Is it possible to unmute him? Yeah, okay, let's try. Sorry, Click Meeting isn't always great for this, but you try speaking. You might need to hover your mouse over the picture which shows AK and unmute yourself then. If have a go. If you start speaking, I'll stop. But yes, so I think it's an interesting point, and I think there is it depends partly on the results framework. How can you speak? No.
Hello.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, hello. Yes.
Oh, sorry. No, I maybe I should keep silent if that's the protocol on this this forum. I think maybe it was just to explain a bit more that it has been very beneficial for us in terms of removing the results framework from any reflective discussions. We haven't removed it from our program entirely. So the team based in Ireland uses it for reporting to our donor, but we don't use it as an implementation guide with in our discussions, and partners don't use it as an implementation guide. They only use the theory of change, and that has been really beneficial to allow for more open conversations, to allow for really honest reflection of the reality and not trying to retrofit the reality into what we had said would happen. So I think that's been really positive. But I won't hijack the meeting.
No, it's really interesting, and I think it's I guess part of the benefit of a small group and this kind of forum is we can have this kind of interactive discussion. I'll be interested to hear what you mean by results framework in more detail, because I think results framework means different things to different people. For me to have a theory of change and to collect data on progress against that theory of change, that is the basis of your results framework. But I think it sounds like you're talking more about targets, progress towards targets.
Exactly, and exactly, like year-on-year targets, and the outcome, the indicator targets, and then the results.
Okay, thank you.
So let me just jump in and say one from our experience. So in Prisma, we are funded by DFAT, the Australian aid, and we have only one target, that is we need to reach 1 million farming household with increased income. After that, we don't have any log frame. We have KPIs that we set by ourselves and agree with the donor, and then those KPIs also doesn't have any target. So actually, we were very lucky in our program that we had only one target. All others are set by us, managed by us. We do our projection, we revise our projection every semester, and exactly the way you said, I think that's that actually helped us a lot. That we don't have a fixed log frame with a year-by-year milestone, and that helped us a lot to be adaptive and do or manage our portfolio as we needed. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah, I think it's like the whole thing is kind of a series of trade-offs and tensions. I think it's definitely true that having a very fixed log frame with very specific annual results, which focuses all attention on it, is quite poisonous to good adaptive management, because that's where all of your organizational effort goes. And Stacey gave another example in the chat where people are so fixated on a results chain diagram, they don't think outside the boxes. So, but I think a good results framework does need to focus people's attention on having a theory of change with accessible changes, qualitative or quantitative, at each level, which then they can gather data on and have a kind of reflective discussion based on this information they're collecting, not just based on kind of what they think or, you know, their experience of implementation. And I guess from that sense, I think removing a results framework entirely runs the risk of leaving a free-for-all. Where you don't have enough structure to have a good discussion about a theory of change. I think we need to go on, though there are a lot of other really good comments on here. And I think let's go on and talk about leadership briefly. Thank you. Okay. So the next category which I wanted to talk about is leadership. And leadership is really important basically because it drives organizational culture and it also drives systems. The most kind of visible, the most easy to influence factor is often who runs an organization, what decisions do they make, what's the senior management interaction like with themselves and with the rest of the program. So I think that leadership to a very large extent can determine organizational culture. But leadership also is responsible for really important decisions regarding organizational priorities. Who exactly is hired? Who is, find my notes. Who is hired? What should an organization be doing? What incentive structures are put in place? Does the organization change its strategy as it goes along, as the context changes? A lot of this comes back to senior decisions. So I think what we found at the DCED is the DCED standard is often driven by a small number of people at the top of the organization who buy into it and find it a useful tool. So we see it as an important factor. Khaled, over to you.
Okay, so when we're talking about leadership, we say, okay, the leaders needs to pull everyone from the front, and it is very evident in our case that when the senior managers and the advisors who are part of the senior management team, they understand the value of data, the wider team is more likely to follow. And we were lucky to have a team leader who actually is very data savvy and moves this agenda from the front. That when we are making any decision, it needs to be backed by data. And he demonstrated that from the top that it is needed, and that was very helpful for setting the culture from the top. One thing we also expect from the senior managers is to ask the right question to their team. A right question is a question that requires a data in answering. So rather than asking the sector team that, okay, you have done an intervention where we worked with agriculture retailers, and if you ask, what do you think the agriculture retailers sales is it increasing or decreasing? Are they feeling happy or not? They can answer that, okay, yeah, it is increasing, it is decreasing. So rather than asking that question, you should ask, what is the sales figure in the last 3 months, and what was that before the intervention started? So just tweaking the question such a way that the answer requires a data gives the sector team also a big incentive to collect those data and make sure they have that in their hand when they're facing their managers, or they're having a meeting discussing about the intervention. And from the senior management side, investing in a standard, and we in Prisma we applied the DCED standard from the beginning. It was very helpful. And that's the decision we made from the beginning, and then we invested time, money, and resource to actually implement the standard. We did the audit in first phase, and then after we passed the audit, we focused on implementing the standard, and that and following that standard definitely helped us a lot. Like I said, in our program, we don't have a very rigid results framework. The problem with not having a framework is it can be also that we are all over the place. So having a standard makes sure that we are actually following a process that is good and that actually gives us our results and data which is good quality. And the next point, we already touched upon that. So rewarding the sector team for identifying problems early. So when we are talking about the failure culture, I already mentioned that having those early signs and finding those early problems and identify those problems early enough gives a lot of advantage to the program to rectify that and do something better that works. So this having a chance to rectify our work is very important for our adaptive program, and we rewarded those people. So that was a senior management decision from our leadership team that we will not promote only people who are getting us more outreach, more impact. We are promoting people who are making the good decision based on the data available. Two of our head of portfolios who are part of the senior management team, they came from the very bottom as a business consultant, and none of them were the part of the star sectors that Prisma had. They were part of the they got the reward because their process was right, the way they were thinking, the way they are collecting the data, and they were making the decision was correct. And we manage a portfolio, and in that portfolio we add and drop intervention and sector a lot. And those two people actually dropped more than others, but they still got the promotion. So this kind of our system for identifying the problems early, and even if it fails, giving that information early enough so that we can make a good decision was very helpful for our program. And we made sure that is part of our reward system, not our ultimate project goal is the only reward system to promote people.
Great, thanks a lot. Okay, so now we're going to go to the whiteboard and clear all of this fantastic information. It is, as I told Mo, recorded and shared, so your insights are not lost. And if possible, I will add. Good. Okay, so now we come to the same drill. You are all expert by now, I think, except for Tina, who's just joined. So all you need to do is think about leadership. How do you promote good leadership for adaptive management? What works in terms of building capacity, supporting leaders, enabling leadership? So put your recommendations in text using the interactive whiteboard, and feel free to tick any which you think are particularly useful. interesting to see a lot of these are kind of becoming about donor relations as well. But maybe not surprising. Let's see. Oh, okay, good. The donor needs to be on board. That's really true. Good. Someone is rearranging these much quicker and better than I am. Thank you, Amy. Yeah. Okay, let's give it another couple of minutes, see what else. Okay, one more coming in. Let's wait for this, and then Khaled will discuss. Let's see if I can change some of the colors in the meantime. Don't think I can. Yes, in the meantime, have a read and put ticks on your favorite. And if you want to select a different color, you'll make for a much more interesting whiteboard. Okay, let's start with some of these things about donors, which actually got the most number of ticks. The donor needs to be board, and you need a clear communication style with the donor early on about challenges and deviations from targets. So these are kind of like looking at both aspects of the kind of donor-program relationship from slightly different angles. What does the donor need to do, and what do your senior managers need to do in order to work with them? What's your experience with this, Khaled?
So in Prisma, currently, I would say we are lucky enough to have a very good donor relationship with the program, but it was not always the case. And I would say our whole results measurement system and data actually helped a lot to improve this donor relationship. I'll explain how. So from the beginning, when we started the program, our system was not in place fully. We did not have enough data or evidence that our work is going to lead to results or not. What we did was we became very open and transparent about our findings. We would share every impact assessment results, every impact assessment reports as we go on. And then later in the stage, we developed our MI system where we have all the data. I'll talk about that in later. And we gave them also access to those dashboards where in real time, when we are updating the data, they can also see that real time. And this openness to data, and when we are talking about results, there's only one source that we have the results. It actually improved our relationship a lot because the trust started to build when we were not changing our data, or we were taking a lot of time to come up with a result. Now we have a system that if our donor asks about any intervention, we can give the results and the data about the intervention in an hour or even in minutes, and that helps a lot. In terms of other involvement, we made sure the donors are involved in our review meetings. So like I said, we have a 6-monthly meeting, and we actually invite them and tell them to choose which day they want to come, and they come and join our meeting, usually as a silent observer, and we will have our discussion as if they don't exist in the room. It was very challenging at the beginning to make that happen, but now we are in a relationship that we can actually do that, and we are talking about failures and success all in front of them without thinking that, okay, donors are listening. So being open and transparent helps a lot to improve that and getting them on board. Regular teaching about how like an MST program works for DFAT specifically, that is definitely part of our task, because for their portfolio this is their only MST program, and we also do that. Our senior management actually puts a lot of time to educate the donors about our approach, what is our principle, how we work, how we manage a portfolio, how we use data to add or drop intervention.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think that's a really interesting finding. It's linked to another comment here about senior management needing space to work, and you need this trust relationship with the donor so that you can have that space. And I worked on a previous program where this trust was lacking, and then it was very difficult to manage adaptively, because the conversations was always about outputs. How will you hit your outputs? How will you hit your impact? And this didn't like give senior management the kind of, what's the word, the level of delegation they needed to manage the program appropriately. I think maybe that also links to the point about culture beating strategy, which I think is perhaps more about culture beating process. So the leader should be kind of technically interested and technically infused, not just kind of enforcing strict adherence to process, which I think is a really important point. And training in MRM for senior management. I know just when I've gone in as when I've worked as a consultant, often programs want training for junior staff, but not for senior staff. The kind of management are too busy, they've got other stuff to do. And I think there's almost always a mistake. They need to understand the MRM system, and they need to buy into it and enforce it. Do you want to talk through your diagram, Khaled?
Yeah, about the culture and process. When you say like we have culture based strategy, we always see these three part of any culture and process involved, where we have a purpose, is usually the program goal, then we have the process and the people, and we need to think all three at the same time if we want to have a culture that is good for everyone. And it's people's emotion, their culture, what process we have, strategy we have, and are all those are connected to our overall purpose or not. So if you think those three together, usually you'll always find a solution that works.
Good. Okay, thank you very much. Let's go back to the presentation. Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. The final thing I wanted to talk about was clear systems for using data. I think this is less important than culture and leadership, because my experience is with a good culture, with a strong leader, you can kind of muddle through unclear systems. But having clear systems does help. Firstly, it influences the culture. Secondly, it tells people exactly what they need to do. It sets expectations. So the DCED standard, which Prisma works with, and which we, obviously at the DCED we manage, tries to give this kind of system whereby you can reflect on your theory of change, gather data against it. We have a few slides from Khaled, but I wonder, Khaled, are you able to just pick one of them to go through, maybe the QMTs?
Okay. Let me just quickly read and go through. So the first one I had was the clear and collaborative intervention design system that helped our accept our failure. The point we mentioned about the failure, it is always acceptable if we do the design jointly. So here our idea was to, when we are designing an intervention, the sector team, results measurement team needs to be involved both together, so that it doesn't sound like a policing from the RM side, but it's the ownership of the design is both on the sector team and RM team. So if you have a process like that, that definitely helps in the failure culture. The next point is a tool that we have in our system. We call it the quality management tool. So this is a very objective-based system to understand if our interventions are working or not. If you look at the form, so this is a form which has a lot of qualitative data and also quantitative data that we rate every 6 months to see if it is if our intervention is good or not, and it all converts into a score. These indicators are a mix of our results. It talks about process, and it also talks about cross-cutting issues like gender, environment, and if there's any other cross-cutting issues there. So what we do is, after we get the score, we have this chart of classifying interventions in 5 categories. So we have push, let flow, change and improve, under observation, and drop. So if an intervention score is more than 70, that means it's in the push category, which translates to we'll put more resources, more emphasis on that intervention, because that's going to give us more good result. If it is in the below 40, we are going to drop that and end that intervention. If it is in between, based on the situation, we are going to either change or re-strategize, or if it's a new, we let flow and wait for more information in the future. So this helped us a lot to manage our portfolio better, and rather trying to be very emotional about our intervention and hanging in there for long time, and using more resource on that. We actually we were very open to drop and add new intervention in the later semesters. There's an illustration in the learning series case study that we wrote about the numbers at results at the end. In June 2017, we dropped around 15 interventions in the sectors, and we added another 12 in the next 1.5 years. So what was happening, those interventions we dropped, if you look at our projection of results from those interventions, it would give us 21,000 more outreach. And because we freed up resources, time and money and people, we could design new intervention, which actually gave us 55,000 more outreach at the end. So we kind of through this process isolated those interventions that are not very helpful, and then that's not going to contribute that much in our end goal, and we could drop them and add new intervention that will give us more. So that's how this tool was very useful in our program to go through the quality management in an objective manner. The third system we have is our management information system. So we use Power BI to visualize our aggregated data. In the backend, we have a database, and this system we developed from the middle of first phase, and that definitely, like I said, helped a lot in terms of building our relationship with our donor, making the data available for quick response, and also in our report writing, in sharing information. It definitely helped a lot. The learning for developing this kind of a system from us has few points. Most important is the senior management's involvement and time to develop the system. In few cases, I have seen that it is task of the RM person, or somebody is assigned outside from the organization who's developing that, and at the end of the day, it is not that useful. In our case, we spent a lot of time from my side, from our team leader, and we also had a project director who helped us designing this system. And now this is a very flexible system, and that serves our purpose very well.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Khaled. So because you had lots of fantastic suggestions on the early whiteboards, we've now run out of time, and I think we're going to close without talking about more of your suggestions. So I guess all that remains is to say thank you to Khaled for providing his insights. If you click on the link in the chat box, you can find the full learning paper from Prisma, which goes through these lessons in a lot more depth and also talks about the different systems he uses. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. It's the first time we've tried this kind of interactive format, so thank you for your participation in it, and please let us know any feedback on how it went. And if you are interested in the DCED standard and the system we kind of recommend for adaptive management, you can see it on our website. So, yep, thank you very much.
One last word from my side. If you want to know more about adaptive management, we had also another case study written on adaptive management. I've also put the link in the chat box. Have a look at that learning series as well.
Great. Thanks, Khaled.
Great. Thanks, guys.